Welcome back to our channel. We want to thank you for watching. As you all know, we took a couple of days to focus on the United Nations General Assembly, and we want to appreciate you all that have watched the videos. I think African leaders have been outstanding so far this particular 79 session. It's important that Africa is sending the message clear to its geopolitical partners that it will not be business as usual. Africa, for the first time, it's having a position or is taking stance on global issues and making its presence felt. That's something very important. But the essence for this video today, it's about what went through the United Nations. But one particular country that stood out with regards to the speeches at the United Nations General Assembly was the country of Sierra Leone. And I will tell you why. We had great speeches from other leaders across the continent that spoke on a whole lot of very important strategic issues in the continent of Africa and other global events. More importantly, Sierra Leone took it to a whole different level. I have a clip here to play, and we will break it down and give you more analysis. But first, we will look into some very important area. The president of Sierra Leone talked about the Sahel situation. He illustrated, went into more details, and showed leadership in that particular area, and taught some major countries in the region on why the Sahel is so important and it's a more strategic location in the continent of Africa. Let's roll the clip and we will join you on the other side.
In the Sahel and West Africa, the regional leadership has been hard at work to find urgent solutions to the numerous peace and security challenges, particularly to curb the spread of terrorism and violent extremism. I call upon the international community to strengthen support for African-led peace initiatives and for the United Nations to play a more active role in addressing the root causes of conflicts. The safety and security of the people in the Sahel and parts of West Africa require a strong commitment from all relevant actors to engage in political dialogue and diplomacy actively to ensure we provide countries in the front line, especially Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, the necessary support they need. Commitment to political transition is necessary, but it should never be at the expense of the safety of vulnerable civilians. There can be commitment and action on both. I've called for meaningful dialogue and led by example by visiting the head of state of Burkina Faso before Sierra Leone assumed the presidency of the United Nations Security Council in August 2024. We need to build bridges, and this requires the international community's commitment to working with the regions to implement dialogue-based, region-led, and region-owned solutions.
The Sierra Leone leader as well went ahead to jab the United Nations, pointing out the errors of the United Nations. And it also explained the importance on why Africa should be on the table. You cannot make decisions from a region that cannot have any influence on the United Nations Security Council. The president explained that it's not just that Africa should be represented in the Security Council, and we all know what the veto powers, the conversation has been out there. We've seen other Africa's geopolitical experts have talked about this very important thing. The president of Sierra Leone dived into this particular representation issue and pushed the United Nations to an extent to see that this is a very important topic that Africa is not going to back down. Let's roll the clip and we will join you again on the other side.
Madam President, our current tenure at the United Nations Security Council has reinforced the view that there is an urgent need for reform. Nearly 80 years after its creation, the Security Council has been stuck in time. Its imbalanced composition is unjust and at odds with current realities, undermining its legitimacy and effectiveness. Unfortunately, Africa remains the unquestionable victim in all of this. Without structural change, the Security Council's effective performance and legitimacy remains unquestionable.
The Sierra Leone president pointed out on a very important debate issue that the continent of Africa had a number of challenges, that some of those decisions are being influenced by votes on the UN Security Council. How is that possible? How is it going to be possible that Africa's interest is represented at the UN Security Council, looking at the voting powers where we talked about all over the past couple of days? It's important. The president was pretty clear in his analysis and talked about that if Africa cannot be represented there, then that's going to be a problem for the region, and that there will be a number of conflicts in the continent of Africa that needs to be resolved, where the powers that be do not see those particular issues to concern them. But more importantly, he talked about African solutions for African problems. Let's roll the clip.
In a historic and successful debate, which I presided over during Sierra Leone's August presidency of the Security Council on addressing the historic injustice and enhancing Africa's effective representation in the Security Council, I spoke as a representative of the continent that has long been underrepresented in the decision-making processes that shape our world on matters of peace and security. That debate had an indisputable resonance. One, that the historical injustice being perpetrated against Africa must be rectified. Two, that Africa must be treated as a special case. And three, that it must be prioritized in the reform process. In expressing appreciation for the active and supportive engagement by the many interest and regional groups, as well as invited member states to the debate, the facts and issues are now clear to all.
Like I said, the Sierra Leone president was clear. He never missed his word. He went ahead really clear with regards to how African, the continent, has been marginalized over the years. He dived into colonialism and also marginalization, where he talked about exploitation and point out a whole lot of other very important specifics. He never missed his word. I think the Sierra Leone president was pretty ready. He did his homework and he laid it out on why the continent of Africa should have a voice on the table, and the reason why the veto conversation is not going anywhere soon. Let's roll the clip.
Africa has long been marginalized in global decision-making processes, and its voices are often drowned out. The legacy of colonialism, economic exploitation, and political marginalization has left deep scars on the African continent, thereby affecting its development, stability, and influence in international affairs.
The question of representation for the continent of Africa is a conversation that is never going to go anywhere. And the president of Sierra Leone highlighted this very important stuff, talked about that if Africa is not still on the table, that there will be a lot of unanswered questions, that a number of African countries have come to realize that without them being on the table, not just sitting there like the United States of America is saying that it supports Africa to have a seat on the Security Council, but without voting right. I think that's a major concern. You all have seen how it is playing the geopolitical media, and why Africa at this particular stage, now than never before, has also been taking very important positions, which some of the geopolitical partners are becoming very concerned, because they know that once Africa is able to make that particular decision and can stand on its own and veto some of those decisions that influence its own future, the game is going to change. Let's listen to what the president said, and we will join you on the other side.
This results in a lack of meaningful representation on issues that directly affect the continent, such as conflict prevention, conflict resolution, peacekeeping operations, and sustainable development. Addressing contemporary global security challenges require the collective wisdom and the cooperation of all nations, not just the privileged few or the most militarily or economically powerful. We urge that equitable representation of Africa, we argue that equitable representation of Africa will better equip the United Nations to tackle global challenges and foster a more just, fair, and peaceful world. As the coordinator of the African Union Committee of 10 on the reform of the Security Council, Sierra Leone remains fully committed to promoting, defending, and soliciting support for the common African position as espoused in the Ezowini Consensus and SAT Declaration. Africa, therefore, demands no less than 2 permanent seats with all the rights and privileges of the permanent members, including the right to veto and 2 additional seats in the non-permanent category of the Security Council.
Let's not forget the country of Sierra Leone. The president talked about the huge experience that this country had. Sierra Leone had a milky history the past couple of decades. We all knew the Sierra Leone conflict, how the world talked about all of these regions and issues that were happening in Sierra Leone at the time. He spoke from an area of experience. He wasn't just talking about what's happening in the world, but he touched a number of conflicts from Sudan to also looking at what's happening in Gaza. He touched the Russian-Ukrainian war, and more importantly, he dived into the Democratic Republic of the Congo region. He spoke about peace. I think this guy was ready. He knew what he wanted to lay out. I thought that his speech was great, and he laid his perspective on a whole lot of global issues as well. I think that particular speech will go down in history. Let's listen to what the Sierra Leone president talked about, the global issues and the points that he raised.
Madam President, more than 30 years ago, Sierra Leone was plunged into a decade-long brutal civil war. More than 50,000 people were killed, and millions fled their homes as refugees and internally displaced persons. The situation in Sierra Leone at that time was not unique. Conflicts existed in other parts of West Africa, in Africa, and around the world. In Sierra Leone, however, we overcame our challenges with a common vision for peace through genuine dialogue, committed leadership, and action. Notably, the hard-won peace we enjoy is not without its fragility, and we remain vigilant in safeguarding it.
On the aspect of global perspective, the Sierra Leone president was pretty clear about his understanding on why his country is working with global and regional organizations. He spoke about ECOWAS and talked about the United Nations and other regional organizations and where Sierra Leone stands at the moment and where Africa stands, which is very important. I think the Sierra Leone leader speech with regards to other African leaders, which were great, but again, he stood out pretty clear. He laid out his point. I thought geopolitical partners will understand where Africans stand in those particular issues and where Sierra Leone stands.
Sierra Leone's peace journey exemplifies the values of ownership, engagement through dialogue, and our partnership with ECOWAS, the United Nations, and the broader international community, which yielded the peace dividend. This story has shaped our engagement at the United Nations Security Council since the commencement of our second tenure in January this year. For almost 9 months, Sierra Leone, as an elected member of the United Nations Security Council, has endeavored to be a voice of reason and a bridge builder with balance and objectivity. We will continue to promote respect for and adherence to international law and the UN Charter, ensure the protection of civilians, end impunity through accountability, and foster dialogue for the peaceful settlement of disputes. Our commitment to these principles is even more imperative now than ever before, as we are confronted with conflicts of great magnitude in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Europe. The need for a ceasefire in Gaza and the wider Middle East, as well as in Sudan, Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and Ukraine, is not just pressing, but urgent. Immediate action is required to prevent further loss of precious lives and human suffering. We need collective action to stop all conflicts and engage in meaningful dialogue so that the countries can move forward with their development agenda in peace, security, and stability. As a country that has experienced the devastating consequences of armed conflict, we acknowledge that peace cannot be achieved in isolation. It requires inclusive political processes, economic development, and respect for human rights. For the millions of civilians trapped in ongoing armed conflicts, words of condemnation and empathy alone are not enough. It is imperative that we act together as the United Nations with a sustained commitment to end the cycle of violence and give innocent civilians the opportunity to enjoy lasting peace and prosperity.
Hopefully, we've informed you in regards to the most important speech from our own perspective at the United Nations. The South African president was clear, and he laid it out on where South Africa has been, and also other countries like Angola. We had Nigeria that struggled to basically find a position in the United Nations. We had other countries as well that spoke lengthily about very important things. Ghana as well, and an awful lot of other countries, which I think was very important. Libya was pretty clear with regards to their position on events on the ground and also the regional issues and global conflict. More importantly, we have other countries in the continent of Africa, especially Malawi and others, that spoke lengthily on a whole lot of other global issues. If African leaders can continue to stick on their position and make it clear, then their geopolitical partners will know where the continent starts. We want to thank you for watching. If you are new here, we'll encourage you to smash the like button. We shall continue with more analysis in the next couple of days to bring you more perspective on where African continent stands on global issues. For now, we are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.